Good day and welcome to my channel. Today I want to talk about how it appears that the EU has already lost its newly started trade war with China almost before it began. Of course, that's only to be expected when you have politicians like von der Leyen, Kaja Kallas, Emmanuel Macron and Friedrich Merz in charge of negotiation and foreign policy. Now, the European media outlets have just described the cancellation of the German foreign minister's visit to China as a significant diplomatic setback. In addition, it was also disclosed that the Chinese leader Xi Jinping didn't wish to meet with the German Chancellor during his scheduled trip to China, citing his busy schedule. So now that trip is cancelled also. And that's considered by many to be a serious diplomatic insult by the Chinese to the Germans. Now, what is Europe's alleged economic strategy vis-à-vis China, and what major slaps in the face for the EU is Beijing now contemplating? Now, we know that Europe is currently grappling with a number of geopolitical challenges, including its lack of a relationship with Russia and problems with its trade with China. Moreover, they claim it's not a rivalry as such with these countries, but a war with adversaries against whom all measures are fully justified. Now, at the recent EU summit, the French President Emmanuel Macron stated that since China has imposed restrictions on the supply of rare earth metals, this threatens the access of European companies to critical raw materials and therefore requires a decisive response. Now, what sort of response he had in mind, he didn't share with us, but perhaps he meant the banning of the French exports of white flags, and that might be one of the things they're thinking about. Now, we all know that rare earth metals are essential components for numerous cutting-edge industries and industrial sectors, from electronics to the military-industrial complex. Now, the issue is that mining these minerals is a dirty, complicated and costly business. And for a considerable period, China was virtually the sole developer of the technology to extract these minerals and do it. And it now controls about 90% of the global market. Now, before I continue, many of you watching this video are not subscribers to my channel. So if you've enjoyed this video, then please hit the subscribe button and also click on the alert bell so you get notified when I post a new video. Plus, if you want to support me, you can make a donation by clicking on the thanks button at the bottom right-hand side of the screen or by clicking on the Buy Me a Coffee link below in the credits. Now, for a while, this didn't cause too many significant issues. But when Donald Trump decided to instigate a trade war using tariffs because of the huge trade deficit that the US has with the world, but particularly with China, it then responded by imposing strict restrictions on the exports of rare earth metals, and it became apparent that this decision could potentially lead to production shutdowns and contractual breaches. Now, it's simply a case of being no viable alternative to the Chinese rare earth metals and all volumes that are being supplied. So sensing a threat to Europe's interest, instead of behaving logically and seeking a compromise, or at least trying to reach an agreement, it immediately began threatening the introduction of sanctions against the Chinese. Macron called for the use of a recently established EU tool, the so-called package of measures to combat economic coercion. Now, according to Bloomberg, in the case of China, this could mean the following measures being implemented, which are the imposition of tariffs on goods that China exports to the EU, restrictions placed on any Chinese investment into the EU, and the introduction of new taxes on Chinese technology companies and restrictions on Chinese companies operating in the European markets. So some commentators have likened the economic coercion measures to a lethal bazooka, but I think they're exaggerating. The provisions have the potential to do a little bit of harm on the Chinese trading partner, but they're not dependent on the European Union. So as a trade tool, it's not that effective, and it's certainly not diplomatic. Now, the decision to implement them can be made by a so-called qualified majority vote, when at least 55% of the EU member states, representing 65% of the population, vote in favour. Now, this means that the European heavyweights, France and Germany, will have the deciding vote in any decision making. Now, according to German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, measures to combat economic coercion were discussed at the summit, but the final decision has not been made as yet. However, this was soon followed by reports of the sudden cancellation of the German Foreign Minister Johann Wadepool's scheduled visit to China, which developed characterised as a complete foreign policy fuck-up. Now, the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz also planned to visit China, but allegedly due to the Chinese President Xi Jinping's demanding schedule, a meeting with the German leader during his visit could not be accommodated. Now, that is a serious go fuck yourself diplomatic stop. Now, the controversy stemmed not only from the rare earth metal situation and the European threats to impose economic sanctions against China. China has also issued a diplomatic note to China expressing its concern on the ban of microchips to Europe, which has had a significant impact on German industry. Now, the Dutch government's to effectively steal and nationalise Xperia, which is a Chinese company owned by its Wingtech technology company and was driven allegedly by concerns regarding the country's security and the need to regulate critical technology. But of course, everybody knows that's complete and utter bullshit, as the Dutch authorities were pressured into doing this by the United States, which had previously pushed them to prevent China from acquiring this particular asset. Now, in response, China's imposed a ban on Xperia's export of chips produced in China to Europe, and these are a critical component without which most automobile production is impossible. Now, in light of these developments, the German concern Volkswagen Audi has initiated negotiations with a new chip supplier. However, even if this deal is successful, the establishment of supply chains will require a lot of time, and the VW management is currently engaged in dialogue with employees regarding the potential implementation of a reduction in their working hours. Now, as the Belgian press has noted, the chip problem for the industry was created unexpectedly, and this isn't a structural issue, but rather because of diplomatic tensions on both sides. Well, actually three sides if you take into account the US and their involvement in it, which is obvious. Now, France has not yet appropriated any major Chinese enterprises, but it has adopted an anti-Chinese stance across the board, including excessive domestic propaganda against China. News outlets are reporting extensively on the so-called purges that Xi Jinping is conducting in China. Meanwhile, the former chief of the French General Staff, General Burkhardt, has claimed that China is a threat to France because it's conducting operations to destabilise the French defence industry. These people are mad, aren't they? Now, the situation is becoming untenable. Small consignments of Chinese clothing published online on the various platforms are now subject to additional duties, which is having a significant impact on their business. Now, the Chinese fashion retailer Shein, which specialises in ultra-low-class clothing, has already had a number of second thoughts since its attempt to establish a market presence in the large supermarkets across the regions of France. Now, it is noteworthy that there are those who persist in attempting to boycott Shein in France, despite the fact that the company merely seeks to operate and sell clothing to the impoverished French masses. It seems advertisers are also refusing to collaborate with the BHV department store chain when the Chinese companies opened up branches. And Disneyland announced it would no longer decorate the windows of the famous Parisian shopping centre for the New Year holidays. Just because it doesn't like China. I wonder if it will close its Chinese parks. I doubt it. Meanwhile, Europeans are generally surprised when China strikes back, even though the country has nationalised their foreign enterprises, imposed tariffs on Chinese cars, and publicly declared the country as its enemy. It seems it's not advisable to build complex supply chains for the sake of long-term relationships, especially when there's a risk of the retaliation of some of the partners. Now, it is important to note that a retaliatory response has been initiated, which has had a significant impact on the sales of French cognac, which is down 40%, and it's at the lowest it's ever been for 15 years. However, the European authorities, in their madness, interpret resistance as a strategy to escalate the situation, misguidedly believing that this will eventually lead to a capitulation from the opposition and not themselves. The tariffs, restrictions and sanctions, they seem to think, are all valid means of achieving this goal, even if that results in the losses of domestic businesses and the European consumers. I mean, the primary objective is to enforce their agenda regardless of the associated cost. Now, this is particularly notable given the EU's authorities' confidence that the financial burden will always fall on others. It does because it lands on the poor, long-suffering people of the countries of the EU who are constant victims of the misguided policies of the European Commission leaders. Anyway, that's it for today. Thank you for watching. I'll see you all again soon. Thank you.